Hey everyone, and welcome to this podcast. We have been exploring Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Discipleship and really asking the question, what is it like to read Bonhoeffer today, and what insights might Bonhoeffer provide? And specifically today, we're at the section in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus talks about loving your enemies, praying for those who persecute you, not resisting an evil person, and really the question of who are we supposed to love, and who is our community, and who as followers of Jesus do we owe our love and our commitment. And right now it's quite fascinating how there are some discussions about possibly there's a hierarchy of loves, that somehow love for our family, love for our immediate neighbors, our nation, our tribe, that somehow these are privileged, that these are above people who are just totally different from us. Even going so far as to ask the question about what about those who are not Christians? Are they brothers and sisters? And what does that look like? And it feeds into the immigration question right now, and the question of how we treat refugees and immigrants. Right now, we're having conversations about national security, securing the southern border, but then questions about kind of human dignity, and especially as Christians, what should be our responsibility to our neighbors? Now, what's interesting is Bonhoeffer, right in the middle of the section on the Sermon on the Mount, where he's dealing with this question about how we respond to an evil person or someone who strikes us on the right cheek or so on. He critiques the reformers and the way that the reformers opened up the possibility of two different types of responses. That somebody could say that, well, yes, sure, as a Christian I feel compassion, but as a citizen or as a lawmaker or as a business owner or something, my responsibility is to uphold the law, and of course I'm not going to treat everybody the same way. And Bonhoeffer has a little bit of a critique of this. So he writes this. He says, at this point, the Reformation interpretation introduced a decisively new concept, namely that we should differentiate between harm done to me personally and harm done to me as a bearer of my office. That is in the responsibility given me by God. In the former case, I am to act as Jesus commands, but in the latter case, I'm released from doing so. Indeed, for the sake of true love, I'm even obliged to behave in the opposite way, to answer violence with violence in order to resist the inroads of evil. This is what justifies the Reformation position on war and on any use of public legal means to repel evil. This fits in with the idea of the two kingdoms theory that comes out of the Reformation, where you have the right and the left hand of God. The right hand is the grace that comes to us in Jesus Christ, and the left hand is God ruling through the state. And Luther is famously talks about how an executioner should be able to sleep well at night because they're doing the work of God in maintaining justice. Bonhoeffer seems to be critiquing this and doesn't want us to be able to divide those things into two. He goes on to say this distinction between private person and bearer of an office as normative for my behavior is foreign to Jesus. He does not say a word about it. He addresses his disciples as people who have left everything behind to follow him. Private and official spheres are all completely subject to Jesus' command. The word of Jesus claimed them undividedly. He demands undivided obedience. In fact, the distinction between private and official is vulnerable to an insoluble dilemma. Where in real life am I really only a private person, and where only the bearer of my office? So he's suggesting that division that comes with the two kingdoms theory and is manifested here, I understand, in this idea of resisting an evil person. He's saying that nice, neat categorization of the Reformation is maybe not biblical, maybe not a good one, and maybe it justifies us from acting and behaving in ways that are contrary to the gospel. So what's interesting is then he goes on to give a commentary on the claim that Jesus makes, where he says, "You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who abuse and persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven." And what's interesting is the passage itself is saying, like, if you only love those who love you, what reward do you get? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And then Bonhoeffer writes this. He says, "This is the point of the Sermon on the Mount, where we encounter for the first time the word which summarizes everything in it, love." He goes on to talk about how loving our enemies is not natural. Like, our natural way of living in life is to love those who are like us, to love our family, to love those who look like us, act like us, are of the same tribe. And interestingly, he talks about how in the Old Testament, he gives an interpretation and says that the war of the Old Testament is God's war against idolatry, that God is trying to reclaim the world from false gods. And he says this: Jesus affirms the Old Covenant. His only concern is to overcome enemies, to achieve victory for God's community. But in this command, once again, he released his community of disciples from the political form of the people of Israel. And as a result, there will be no more wars of faith. God promised that we would gain victory over our enemies, precisely by loving them. And then he says, loving one's enemies is not only an unbearable offense to the natural person, it demands more than the strength a natural person can muster. Now, I realize that he is talking about loving enemies and putting this conversation in that context. But it seems that Bonhoeffer here is short-circuiting this idea that there's a hierarchy of love. In fact, it seems as though he is saying that we are called into a new way of life in Jesus Christ. That is, the language he will use is a supernatural form of love. That naturally we don't want to love people who are different from us or believe something different from us. That's not our natural state. And so we need God's revelation and love in Jesus Christ to empower us to be able to love those who are different from us. And then he makes this statement, and I think this is a pretty profound paragraph. What is undivided love? Love which does not show special favor to those who return our love with their own. In loving those who love us, our kindred, our people, our friends, yes, even our Christian community, we're no different than the Gentiles and the tax collectors. That kind of love is self-evident, regular, natural, but not distinctly Christian. Another way to maybe talk about this is that it's pagan, that putting in a hierarchy of loves and putting the natural type of love ahead of the supernatural type of love is, again, he uses the word the Gentiles. Another way of talking about it is it's pagan. Of course you're going to love those who love you, and you're going to hate those who aren't like you. And that's the way that much of the world functions. And what he's saying happens in Jesus Christ is that this distinction gets obliterated. He says, yes, in this case, it really is the same thing that non-Christians and Christians do. Loving those who belong to me through blood, history, or friendship is the same for non-Christians and Christians. Jesus does not have a lot to say about that kind of love. People know all by themselves what it is. He does not need to light its flame, to emphasize it or exalt it. Natural circumstances alone force it to be recognized for non-Christians and Christians. Jesus does not need to say that people should love their sisters and brothers, their people, their friends. That goes without saying. But by simply acknowledging that and not wasting any further words on it, and in contrast to all that, commanding only love for enemies, he shows what he means by love and what they are to think about the other sort of love. He's saying that Jesus doesn't talk about these natural forms of love because they're natural. And what he teaches his disciples to do is to love their enemies, which is the hard part. But I think we can expand this out to loving people who are different from us. That the love of Jesus Christ now breaks down these barriers that would divide us from one another, and that would cause us to not reach out in compassion and not reach out in love. So again, he goes on, and he refers to this love as extraordinary. He says, what is Christian depends on the extraordinary. That is why Christians cannot conform to the world, because their concern is this kind of extraordinary type of love. But what does this consist of? It is the existence of those blessed in the Beatitudes, the life of the disciples. It is the shining light, the city on the hill. It is the way of self-denial, perfect love, perfect purity, perfect truthfulness, perfect nonviolence. Here is undivided love for one's enemies, loving those who love no one and whom no one loves. It is a love for one's religious, political, or personal enemy. In all of this, it is the way which found its fulfillment in the cross of Jesus. What is this type of love? It is the love of Jesus Christ himself, who goes to the cross in suffering and obedience. It is the cross. What is unique in Christianity is the cross, which allows Christians to step beyond the world in order to receive victory over the world. The passion in the love of the crucified one, that is the extraordinary mark of Christian existence. But what Bonhoeffer is suggesting is the love that we have, or supposed to have for the world, is a love that transcends our political allegiances, a love that transcends our national allegiances. It's not that we can't be a part of these things, but if we're going to create a hierarchy of love, he is going to put love of enemy above all of these other things. That love of those who are different from us, love for the quote unlovable, but unlovable in the sense that we don't understand. We're people's lives are different from us. Their cultures are different from us. And so Bonhoeffer seems to be suggesting it is our love for those who are different from us. That if we're going to create a hierarchy at all, and I don't think we should, but if we're going to create one, that is the love that is the highest form of love. That is the love to what we are called to. And I think that has important implications for us today as we think about immigrants and refugees. How do we love those who God puts in our lives, our neighbor in proximity, our immigrant and refugee neighbors? Bonhoeffer is going to suggest that we are called to love in a way that transcends these boundaries. It doesn't mean that we can't have borders. It doesn't mean that we can't have law and order. It doesn't mean any of those things. But it does reframe, I think, the conversation for the Christian community about our relationship with our immigrant and refugee neighbors. And I think it also, could possibly reach to our relationship to the rest of the world. What does grace and empathy look like? And I realize right now we're living at a time when empathy and compassion is being ridiculed and mocked. But as I read Bonhoeffer, I see him suggesting that of course it's going to be ridiculed and mocked. Because the ways of the world, the Gentiles, the tax collectors, the pagan, these are the words that Scripture seems to use is about power and violence. Jesus says to Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. He's not saying it's a spiritual world out there somewhere. He's saying my kingdom is not like yours. It's not predicated on violence. It's not predicated on using the sword to kind of force people into submission. It is a way of life in a kingdom that is now grounded in love and invites people in. So what I find in Bonhoeffer here is really, I think, a message for the Christian community. That love of those who are different from us, including our enemies, that is the type of supernatural love that God brings us in Jesus Christ. It opens us up to a way of life that is not merely natural, is not something we could get to on our own because we would close ourselves off. But it is now a way of life grounded in compassion and empathy. Now, what does this look like for the Christian community? And what is the difficulty of trying to be a people of love and compassion and empathy in a world obsessed with power and violence? That's a good question. I can't answer that for everybody else. I can only answer that for me and the people whom God is putting in my life. So again, what we find in Bonhoeffer, I think, is powerful. It's this reminder of the power of Christian love to transform us in a way that we get beyond ourselves and begin to truly love those who are different from us, begin to truly love our neighbor.